First of all, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you very much for being here today. I'd like to begin our time together today by acknowledging that Mohawk College is situated on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, and is currently home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. This acknowledgement is a starting point for settlers like myself to engage with Canada's history and to make a commitment to in-depth learning while understanding that speech alone does not create change, action does. As I reflect on my personal intention in delivering it, I am struck by my responsibility to better serve the Indigenous people and the land we are acknowledging. Coming together today allows us to discuss and to define what actions we are taking and will continue to take towards systemic reconciliation. I'd like to thank everyone very much for spending this time with us today, recognizing that we have welcomed a number of new people to our team who I have not yet had the opportunity to meet. A quick note that I am Wendy Lawson, Dean of the School of Health and Community Services. I look forward to having the opportunity to work with you. Today, our school is introducing an exciting new opportunity to come together to celebrate successes, share best practices, and learn from each other. This session marks the first Behind the Strategies event, intended to foster collaboration and to demonstrate our school's ambitions and actions that power the college's strategic plan. At the President's Breakfast in August, President Ron McCurley introduced Mohawk College's new 3-year strategic plan spanning 2022 to 2025. In addition to recommitting to our mission, vision, and values, this plan will allow us to continue to move forward with ambitious goals and leadership outcomes. The strategic plan identifies 6 aspirations, representing where we want the college to be, each with strategic direction, how we will get there, and outcomes to define what it will look like when we have arrived. Each Behind the Strategy session will be an opportunity to focus on an aspiration and how we as a school can be empowered to make a meaningful contribution. Today's theme is the first aspiration in the plan, that we will meaningfully advance truth and reconciliation. And I am excited and grateful to introduce colleagues from our team and from across the college that will lead us through presentations and dialogue, showcasing supports and services, partnerships, and outstanding work that has been done to create Indigenous curriculum. Our first presenters, Priscilla Patterson and Heather Burnside, are faculty in the nursing department of our school and leaders and champions for Indigenous education and curriculum within the nursing programs. Priscilla has been faculty and coordinator within the nursing programs for many years and has made immeasurable contributions to both programs of studies and to our partnership with Six Nations Polytechnic, and is joined by Heather Burnside, who we welcomed to our team earlier this year in the spring. As a quick housekeeping note, before I turn the presentation over to Priscilla and Heather, please open up the chat and look for a link to the virtual whiteboard. This is going to be a tool that you will be asked to access during the course of the presentation. You should be able to sign into the virtual whiteboard using your Mohawk College single sign-on credentials. So we'll give everybody just a moment to get themselves set up, and then Priscilla and Heather, please, whenever you're ready, take it away. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Wendy. Perfect. So I think I'll get started. So thank you, Wendy, for that introduction. Priscilla, my colleague that's presenting with myself, are very excited to share the work that we've done earlier this year to contribute to the strategic plan to advance reconciliation through curriculum change. So with that, I'm just going to introduce ourselves quickly. So Wendy provided a quick overview of our role here at Mohawk College. Personally, I am Anishinaabe settler ancestry. My family comes from Saugeen First Nation, although my experience as an Indigenous person has been mostly that of an urban one. So I was born in Toronto, raised in Brantford, Ontario, and now I live and work on Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe territory here in Hamilton, Ontario. So excited to be a part of the Mohawk College team. I joined in April of 2021, and I currently teach in the BSCN program. So I will hand it over to Priscilla to introduce herself.
Thanks, Heather. I too am from settler ancestry, and my mother is Ojibwe from the Serpent River First Nation. And much like Heather's experience, I've been very much raised and born and raised in Ontario, and that is the background that I come from. But I certainly spent a lot of time learning Indigenous history, and as Wendy mentioned, with a strong passion for supporting Indigenous nurses in our programming.
Thank you. And it was great to see and hear the land acknowledgement at the beginning of this presentation. This is one thing that as educators and staff we can do to advance reconciliation, and also recognize that a land acknowledgement in itself isn't reconciliation, but it is one step towards it. As an Indigenous person who is not a member of the surrounding communities, it is appropriate for myself to do a land acknowledgement, but just to note that if I was to present on my home community of Saugeen First Nation, that would not be something that would be appropriate to do. I think Priscilla mentioned the analogy of you wouldn't welcome yourself into your own home. So just a little teaching point about that as well. So thanks again, Wendy, for providing that land acknowledgement. And it's a tangible thing that staff and faculty can do within their own classrooms to advance reconciliation.
So just recently, this past September 30th, marked our first observance of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. These visuals serve as a reminder of the work that needs to be done towards reconciliation. I'll give you a little bit of the landscape here. Our top left is the Brantford Residential School, also known as the Mush Hole. And following confirmation of the 215 unmarked graves in Kamloops, BC in May of 21, this memorial was erected. Bottom left is a logo that is commonly used on September 30th, which was known as Orange Shirt Day, previous to our National Day for Truth and Reconciliation being announced. The bottom left-hand area is the Eagles Among Us. Some of you may or may not know this, but it is monuments that are in the Stony Creek location. And at the time of the discovery of the lost souls, 215 shoes were placed at the memorial site at Battlefield in Stony Creek. The center monument is a monument in Spanish Ontario. That is where my uncles went to residential school. And in the right is the Spanish residential school where my mother went. My sister and I visited that site for the very first time this summer. And it was quite a moving and emotional day of reflection. So on that note, let's just take a moment and reflect. If September 30th is a day to spread awareness and reflect on the tragedies that were experienced by Indigenous peoples as a result of the residential school system, then what does truth and reconciliation mean for you? So I'll just give us a moment to think about that.
Thanks, Priscilla. So no need to share your thoughts there, but just for an internal reflection practice there. So we do have some objectives that we'd like to cover. We'd like to provide a background and rationale as to why Indig 10039, which is the course code for Indigenous Ways of Knowing and Doing in Healthcare course, is needed. Provide an overview of the development of the course and the whole process and engagement piece that went into that development piece. I'd also like to provide an overview of the actual course, the content that's covered, and how we've delivered the content. I'd like to showcase and celebrate student learning and success, and reflect on how educators and faculty can advance reconciliation in the classroom setting.
So as Wendy introduced, Mohawk College strategic plan introduced the 6 strategic aspirations in this year's plan, or coming year's plans, 22 to 25. And you'll see in the top left-hand corner there that meaningfully advancing sorry, I can't talk today, meaningfully advance truth and reconciliation is one of the strategic aspirations. It further states that the path towards truth and reconciliation is sharing and understanding the truth of Indigenous history and people, working towards decolonization and indigenization, and building relationships in order to do good reconciliation work. The strategic direction that is highlighted is to commit to including Indigenous knowledge, culture, and history in all areas of the college experience, both in and out of the classroom, including the integration of Indigenous learning outcomes into programs of studies throughout the college. So a little bit on the context for course development. In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada published 94 calls to action that aim to redress the legacy of residential schools and advance the process of Canadian reconciliation. There were 7 specific calls to action that were related to health. We call upon, number 24 says, we call upon medical and nursing schools in Canada to require all students to take a course dealing with Aboriginal health issues, including the history and legacy of residential schools, the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Treaties and Aboriginal Rights, and Indigenous teachings and practices. This will require skill-based training in intercultural competency, conflict resolution, human rights, and anti-racism. So this was some of the foundational reasons why we had to get a course in place. Further to that, in 2020, the College of Nurses of Ontario revisited their entry to practice competencies, and there were a number of competencies, including those with a focus on clinician, professional, leader, advocate, and scholar, that were all addressed and updated. And professional nurses were required to respond to that. So in that, the curriculum needed to ensure that we were inputting that information into the curriculum piece. The Canadian Nurses Association also released a statement which stated, similar to all sectors of society, anti-Indigenous racism exists in healthcare and the nursing profession. This long-standing indignity is the root cause of many health disparities among Indigenous peoples in Canada and needs to be tackled aggressively at all levels. So at this point, we're going to take that opportunity to look at a collaborative board of sorts, and Nicole's going to assist us with that in the chat. But we would like you in small groups to reflect on what we shared about the strategic direction, as well as a little bit about what this course is going to be about, and think about the following statement. So commit to including Indigenous knowledge, culture, and history in all areas of the college experience, both in and out of the classroom, including the integration of Indigenous learning outcomes into programs of studies throughout the college. We'd like you to reflect on how you think your program currently may respond to that strategic direction. And we'd also like you to reflect on what you think your program can do to advance the strategic direction.
Rich responses and thoughtful reflections from the breakout rooms. This is wonderful to see your engagement and start to think about what your program's currently doing and the program that you're in, what you can continue to do to advance reconciliation in the classroom. So I'm not going to spend any time going through word for word, but it was a great reflective exercise, and thanks everyone for your participation.
Okay, yes, good. I'm back to the screen. I'll just skip over that one. Thanks very much, Heather, and thank you, everybody. I echo Heather's comments. That's great to see the engagement and get people thinking in reflecting on where we can move the strategic plan forward. I'm highlighting this screen as it's most important to the curriculum process, and in keeping with the Mi'kmaq educator Marie Basti's phrase, "Nothing about us without us." This course was conceptualized and created with the guidance and contributions of knowledge from elders, Indigenous community members, curriculum specialists, leadership, and various Mohawk College teaching and learning consultants. Without this very broad team of individuals, this course would not have come together as nicely as it did.
Thanks, Priscilla. So this next slide really highlights the goals or the aims of the course. So the course again is titled Indigenous Ways of Knowing and Doing in Healthcare. So this course aims to really to prepare the healthcare student in the development of professional therapeutic relationship and advocacy and professional practice skills that are ethical, equitable, non-judgmental, respectful, and is trauma-informed in response to the values, beliefs, cultural practices, and diversity of Indigenous peoples in Canada. And I just wanted to highlight the phrase healthcare student, because when we developed this course, it was intended to be delivered to the PN or the practical nursing program students. However, we really wanted to make sure that this course was developed so it was transferable to other students in healthcare programs across the School of Health. So this course uses a variety of teaching methods. You'll see we review the evaluation measures that we've used within the course, and we've really provided an emphasis on self-reflection to guide learning. So we know that it's just as important to unlearn ideas and beliefs and biases that we all hold as much as it is important to learn about the content. We also discuss social discrimination, racism, stereotypes, and how these assumptions and colonization ideologies contribute to the harm of patients, families, communities, and populations. So going towards to review the course learning outcomes, or the CLOs. So we sought, or this course seeks to explore Indigenous ways of knowing and worldviews, and how these worldviews compare and contrast to our personal and Western worldviews of health and well-being. This course critically analyzes the impact of distal determinants of health on Indigenous peoples and well-being. So distal determinants of health, some examples of that include colonization, such as the Indian Act, residential schools, self-determination, those higher level determinants of health for Indigenous peoples. Critically analyze the impact of proximal and intermediate determinants of health on Indigenous peoples' health and well-being. So proximal determinants of health being more of those determinants of health that we're used to hearing about: gender, income, education, that type of thing. And intermediate determinants of health are the systems that feed the proximal determinants of health. So education systems, healthcare systems, justice systems, just as a few examples for you. And then explore the principles of cultural safety in healthcare with Indigenous peoples. And this is really one of the outcomes that we sought to achieve with this course. We know that nurses are in a vulnerable position and a very privileged position to provide care for patients, including Indigenous patients and their family. And that's really the outcome that this course seeks to achieve. And analyze approaches for improving healthcare among Indigenous communities. So we talk about wise practices in research. We talk about improving relationships with Indigenous people. So more high level concepts are also discussed as well throughout the course. So to highlight some of the evaluation measures that we use. So we intentionally utilized many reflections within the course as an evaluative measure. And again, this is really based on the notion that we must unlearn ideologies and beliefs and ideas that we've been taught throughout our entire lives, just as much as it is to learn new content. So we built in evaluations that were built on participatory learning foundations. The students engaged in weekly reflections. These were small, short, 150 words, but it really allowed the student to reflect on the weekly content that was presented. There was also a creative reflection, which we've showcased some of the students' amazing work that went into this assignment, and also a summative reflection. There was also a group paper and a group presentation that was on the foundation of cultural safety and really the application of cultural safety. So at times I find it's hard for students to conceptualize cultural safety when it's transferred to the clinical setting. And this assignment really helped hone in on those skills and hone in on what cultural safety really means. Like if somebody said, well, what can we do to provide cultural safety care? That's what this assignment really sought to evaluate and to teach the students. And then there was we say it's a mini exam. It was really more of a knowledge checkpoint. There was 20 questions. The intention is for when we're able to safely meet in person to have a more experimental learning week that week, learning on the land. That's really important to Indigenous learning foundations.
So you can see from the title, this was meant to be the introductory slide before the evaluations slide. So my apologies for the out of order. But the Indigenous Ways of Knowing and Doing in Healthcare course, it was the inaugural delivery in spring, summer of 2021. We had a number of students from semester 2 and 3 practical nursing, 340 students actually in total, which was quite a rich opportunity to educate and to communicate with a number of students. It was taught from a first voice perspective, so there was a combination of Indigenous faculty and allies in the summer teaching. And it was a 14-week semester, as Heather described, 42 hours, and that included 1 week of exams. There were 3 core curriculum courses, 3 hours of core curriculum course, and 2 hours were online and 1 hour of independent learning. And that was really important so that the students could really engage with the content and information. And they were required to read a number of chapters and watch videos, as well as articles to bring home the various topics that you see on the right-hand part of the slide there. And you can see there's the Indigenous knowing and worldviews, post-colonial theory, health policy, strength and resiliency, colonization, anti-Indigenous racism, bias and power, proximal and distal determinants of health, cultural safety, trauma-informed care, reconciliation and allyship, as well as wise practice and research with Indigenous peoples. Those topics, again, were fleshed out over many of the consultations with community as well as Indigenous leaders and our curriculum experts. So there was just a little picture at the bottom there that talked about the experiential aspect of learning that we tried to stay true to, so that we're not just giving information, but rather how are students engaging with that information and then translating that into practice. That was a really, really important aspect of this course. I'll skip to the next one. Hopefully I can go back into present mode. There we go. So our one of the things that we did with this course was try to again get students engaged as much as possible. So the development of the escaping colonized thinking activity was born of that idea. There was a combination of people that were crucial to putting this together, including the rapid response team, and their expertise, and that's Amanda Belmonte and Rachel Boersma. And then content experts and additions of graphics and engagement activities were facilitated by Joanne McCarthy and myself. So we're going to give you an opportunity to work through the learning activities so you can understand and feel what it feels like. And it is part of the course. So it should take about 15 minutes, and Nicole's going to pop the link for that into the chat in your small groups and open the rooms. Hi, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you had an opportunity to work through a number of those classroom activities and distractor videos, and you got a good sense of the experience that the student would get to try and apply and connect with some of the knowledge, some of the culture by listening to the music and by observing the Indigenous dance. So as again, part of the traditions and ceremonies and cultures. So I'm going to continue on just because we're really short of time.
Thanks, Priscilla. And also want to mention we do the RRT team that really facilitated this activity, provided a YouTube link for a UDL YouTube video. So it doesn't include the clicking and whatnot, but it does provide access to all the content that was shared in that video. Okay, so I'm going to take a very quick moment here to talk about how we can translate some of these ideas into the classroom to move towards reconciliation. So just wanted to point out this notion of a deficit discourse versus a strengths-based lens and the importance of this. So a deficit discourse refers to this idea of disempowering patterns of thought, language, and practice that represent people in terms of deficiencies and failures. So this is important because historically Indigenous peoples have been written in a negative narrative, and this is done through media, even research, and we know for sure healthcare too. The approach to that would be to utilize a strengths-based approach, which seeks to move beyond the traditional problem-based paradigm and offer a different language for thinking about and discussing issues, which I find is difficult at times as a healthcare provider because we are taught to traditionally focus on what's wrong and what we can do to fix people. But really, it's definitely a different shift in thinking. So you can see here on the other side of the screen here, I've provided some examples of what I mean when I talk about deficit discourse. So some of these research articles, hopelessness and excessive drinking among Aboriginal adolescents, Canada's Indigenous suicide is worse than we thought. If you can just go to the next slide, Priscilla. Just a few more examples. Aboriginal homelessness, an epidemic, patterns of Aboriginal crime. Indigenous inmates make up 45% of all people in Alberta's federal prisons. So very negative narrative, negative deficit discourse that are discussed in these titles alone. So for you as faculty and educators, we should be aware of this notion and adopt a more strengths-based approach in the classroom. So what this means is teaching content through this strengths-based lens as a form of reconciliation to change that narrative. So you can see on the other side of the screen there some examples of a strengths-based article. So promoting the strengths and resilience of Indigenous community through photo voice, a research method that's often used. Cultural continuity, traditional Indigenous language and diabetes in Alberta First Nations, a mixed method study. So really celebrating the strengths of Indigenous culture and language within a healthcare issue. Keep going, Priscilla. I think there's a few more points. So again, shifts the discussion from deficits to strengths. And this can be done by including articles that look at issues and concerns through a strengths-based lens versus that deficit-based lens. This can be done in research, and one of the examples that I recently got from Dr. Janet Smiley was choosing outcomes. So instead of choosing a research outcome of unemployment rates, choosing an outcome of employment rates. So just switches that narrative. And then to be aware of your own language bias views in the classroom. So really reflect on how does this reflect Indigenous peoples in the classroom. So allyship, is this?
Yep, I'll go. Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. So looking at, what we can do moving forward, allyship is defined as a lifelong process of building relationships based on trust, consistency, and accountability with marginalized individuals and or groups of people. The term itself means that you recognize the privilege that settler cultures have and take for granted. It also implies that you challenge and work towards breaking down those barriers that continue to violate Indigenous communities. Being an ally requires social action, strength, courage, humility, and support. And it is an ongoing and lifelong process. So how can you be an ally? You can educate yourself about the TRC calls to action and develop an individual goals to address them. So what are your personal goals? What are your professional goals? And what action plan are you putting in place to achieve that? You can attend the various Indigenous learning sessions that are offered through Mohawk College. There was an Indigeno series, the Bead and Read, Mythbusters. There's an upcoming 3-piece framework for the Indigenous inclusion at the GIFT conference this week, as well as the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit terminologies. I'm sure we'll hear more about that in our upcoming presentation. Land acknowledgements and treaties is also upcoming in October, as All My Relations, and recently a presentation by Eddie Robinson. You can access resources from the Mohawk College Indigenous Student Services site, as well as online sources. McMaster Health Initiative, Mohawk Library has tons of resources, as does some of the government resource pages. You can access free online Indigenous cultural training courses. There's Indigenous Canada courses that are offered through the University of Alberta. And there are also Cancer Care Ontario offers Indigenous relationship and cultural safety courses. Unfortunately, those right now are overwhelmed and they haven't reached their maximum number of subscribers. So please keep checking in. They will come back online for you to register, but they provide 13 wonderful courses that will provide you with an excellent foundation. Connect with Indigenous faculty, ask questions, or ask for guidance on how to link course materials or focus content, either within nursing or within your school programs. Audit courses that are offered through Mohawk. Mohawk has a number of courses that are available now, and they are available to us for almost free. I think we only still have to pay the administration fee, and you can join the class. Heather?
Great, thanks Priscilla. So some next steps that you can take to advance reconciliation is there's a huge element of self-education and critical self-reflection that we've kind of talked about continuously throughout this presentation of how important reflection is and critical reflection in your own practice. Be aware of how you represent Indigenous peoples in the classroom. So ensure correct terminology is being used. We should be using Indigenous with a capital I. We shouldn't be using Aboriginal, at some other terms that are often floated around too. Resources should reflect a strengths-based approach like we talked about. Be observant for bias in the classroom, both from faculty and students, and have respectful conversations that challenge the status quo. I've heard from students having unsafe conversations with faculty that have made them feel very unsafe in the classroom. So it's important that we reflect from both a faculty and a student perspective. Sorry, I have a friend here with me. Create space for open discussion and classroom safety. Yeah. That's a really big one as well, to ensure that we can discuss concepts and be vulnerable, but also be respectful and ensure that there's no unsafe environments that are being created in the classroom. Integration of Indigenous concepts into non-Indigenous courses, and honor and respect Indigenous voices. So if you're using resources about Indigenous people, they should be written by Indigenous people or prepared by Indigenous voices. So this declaration of intent, this is something that's currently in draft at Mohawk College, and this is really based on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which states that Indigenous people have the right to maintain, control, and protect and develop their cultural heritage, traditional knowledge, and traditional cultural expressions. So for any INDS courses, so in the Indigenous courses, we're required, Mohawk College, this draft declaration of intent supports that they're required to respect the knowledge that's being shared, and that any changes, adaptations to the content curriculum must be approved in collaboration with the original course writers and consultants and departments. It outlines or highlights a first voice, so outlines respect for Indigenous knowledge and how the course content is designed and to be taught from Indigenous first voice and lens. And the delivery format. So the Indigenous Ways of Knowing and Doing in Healthcare course is designed to be taught by first voice registered nurses. And in the spirit of not overburdening Indigenous faculty, allies may be mentored to support the teaching of this course and will occur in collaboration with the course writers and Indigenous course consultants and departments. Priscilla, I don't know if you wanted to mention anything more about that, but
I think I'll just leave it there because our next presenters might have more to share on that.
Great, thanks.
So in wrapping up our presentation, in conclusion, we would like to share some student quotes and comments that came our way. And that is in answer to the question of how do we know that we're doing it right or that we're getting it right? And that's a very important aspect of the work that we're doing. So I'll start by playing one audio, and then Heather and I will read two further. And we would just ask you to use your eyes as a medium to support the discussion and just reflect on what's being said.
An awareness of Indigenous culture and historical events impacting Indigenous health provides an important layer of context in determining how to provide culturally competent care, and I will apply this to my future work as a nurse.
Great, thanks Priscilla. I can read the next quote. These were taken from the reflections as part of the course, so written by students. So, and I quote, "Overall, I find myself more perceptive after this course. It aided me in gaining various skills, which has allowed me to become more proficient at providing care in accordance with Indigenous people's needs. I learned to appreciate the beauty of the Indigenous culture, allowing me to comprehend their struggles on a deeper level, which influenced my nursing practice and philosophy. This course has guided me to become a more equitable individual and has shaped me to become an ethical and non-judgmental professional. My convictions and principles were changed, and it empowered me to allow myself to advocate for the Indigenous population. It is a privilege to be rewarded with insight and information regarding the history of the Indigenous population. Through this course, I was able to build a sound knowledge base and enough experience that serves as a foundation in the provision of ethical care, which is advantageous and pertinent to my field of work and my practice as a nurse."
Thank you, Heather. And this last quote, "As the semester began and my adrenaline rushed throughout my body for Wednesday to arrive, it was time for all my assumptions and learning about Indigenous people through a colonial lens to come crushing down. It was awesome to find out our teacher has Indigenous roots. This would make the course 10 times better because everything would be delivered either in black or white, and we could not be in the gray zone where we have spent most of the years when learning about Indigenous peoples. In the first week, I learned the importance of the land acknowledgement because this was something shoved down at us in school without explanation or meaning behind it. The assigned textbook was really interesting and well put together. I found myself lost in the textbook and reading multiple chapters. The textbook is taught through storytelling, an interactive way of teaching."
Thanks, Priscilla. And we've included a QR code that just shares a few more student experiences through their reflections. So if you're welcome to check that out as well. I know we are pressed on time, but we did include some resources to get you started. This is always a question that we get asked about, well, what can I do? What can I read? So here's some, and we also have, we have a ton. So if anybody wishes to go beyond this list, we can certainly support you in finding those resources.
So I'd like to thank everybody and also give you an opportunity. I know many people didn't get to work through the entire activity. If you get a chance, do take that opportunity to work through it. And I'll leave Heather with our final comments.
Thanks, Priscilla. I'm not sure I have any final comments, but I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us and participating and being engaged in this whole process. And thank you for your support as well. And I'm excited I'll let Wendy introduce the next presenters, but excited to hear what they have to say as well.
Thank you so much, Heather and Priscilla, for sharing this presentation with us. It was extremely interesting, extremely engaging, and really incredibly important work. And we really appreciate not only the work that you and many other people put into the development, but also you taking the opportunity to share that experience with us so openly. So thank you for that. And I would like to introduce our other guests today. So joining us from the Indigenous Initiatives, Education and Student Services team, we have a number of guests. Thank you very much for joining us. So Amy Kalaitis, our Director of Indigenous Initiatives and Special Advisor, along with Leah Hogan, our Manager of Indigenous Education, Amanda White-Kalina, Manager of Indigenous Student Services, Jessica Pierce, our Curriculum Development Specialist for Indigenous Initiatives, and Carly Mike, Indigenous Initiatives and Access Coordinator. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. I appreciate it very much. I'm not sure who exactly I'm turning it over to, but take her away. Thank you.
I think Amy's pointing to me, and I think that's right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having myself and everyone else here. If I could quickly, oh, I can screen share. Here we go. I'll share a couple quick slides, just as a little bit of an overview of what Student Services offers. I feel like some folks have maybe had some experience chatting with our team or referring students, or maybe just know a little bit about what we offer, but just as a refresher and an overview on what we have. So the goal of Indigenous Student Services is to essentially support students throughout their entire educational journey as they're transitioning in and maybe thinking about what kind of programs they want to take. We work really closely with recruitment for that, to when they're kind of here, engaging and that sort of thing. And then as they're transitioning out, and maybe giving them a couple different options depending on which direction they want to go in. So while they're here, a couple different services and supports that we have include Elder as a resource. So offering maybe one-on-one support or drop-ins or group activities. It looked a little bit different while we were in person. Now that we've been virtual, we've been partnering up with McMaster University for Indigenous students to be able to have those kinds of opportunities over computer or phone or things like that. We also have Indigenous peer tutoring. So we put a call out to our students just to see any students who might be interested in tutoring to be available for our Indigenous students. And we kind of take like real-time feedback from students. So if they're looking for something specific, they're more than welcome to reach out to us to let us know maybe a subject or something that they might be struggling with, and we can do an outreach to our students to see who might be available or interested in that kind of thing. So that's available as well as an Indigenous counselor. So our Indigenous counselor is Beth, who is seeing students kind of limited or should be soon. But we work with counseling as well to help refer students over or maybe find some solutions to some things that might be going on, as well as offering self-care circles. Some other folks on our team who are here to support our students are our coaches. So they're essentially responsible for supporting and navigating the processes and procedures when students are coming into college or are here, and maybe when they're looking to exit out, whatever that looks like. So it could be things around registration or band funding, employment opportunities, those kinds of things. They're essentially the first point of contact for our students. And they work very closely with our recruiter, Kayla. So they kind of do like a nice sort of handoff once students decide what program they're going into and they accept their offer. The students can begin working with our coaches really closely. And our coaches also support with student success activities and self-ID support that I'll touch on later. We also have our Indigenous awareness programmer who supports with cultural awareness activities, student engagement, our Elder program, including guest speakers, crafts, drop-ins, mail-outs, different things like that. So while we've been virtual, we've been able to do mail-outs and kind of some unique ways to service and support students and keep them engaged as much as we can. And again, we like to take real-time feedback from students. So if there's something that they're looking for in particular, we welcome them to reach out to our programmer or our coaches. Or our main email address for the department. And kind of coming back to the coaches and some of the things that they do, including the student workshops. So there's things like study skills, time management, tips, employment gatherings, kind of a number of different things to help support students build their portfolio or get them ready for employment or things like that. So we work closely again with other areas in the college to help bring those different sessions to our students. Another piece to touch on that's new for 2020, I guess it will be now, the virtual learning basket that was led by Leah with support and collaboration from our team across the team. Is essentially a way to help students as they're navigating the new virtual world that we're in. So students that are interested are able to sign up through VLB at mohawkcollege.ca. And once they get access to the virtual learning basket course, they're able to go in and go through a number of different modules and kind of mini quizzes that essentially give some tips and tricks to help navigate online learning and looking at it from the physical, mental, and emotional and spiritual realms to support that. And at the end of it, we're able to support students with a gift card and some other gifts just to kind of help make their experience at home a little bit more, I guess, enjoyable as they're navigating online learning. The next piece is Indigenous self-identification. So this one's an important one. Just if you're engaging with students and maybe they've self-identified to you or they've made mention of something, it's always good to maybe mention the self-identification piece, because sometimes students just choose not to, or they don't know that it exists, or maybe are a little bit distrustful. They don't know what it's all about. It's always good to mention this, or at least refer them over to our area so that we can chat them through it. It's completely voluntary, but if students do choose to self-identify, it just makes sure that they're kept in the loop with different things that are going on that will help support them. And it gives them an opportunity to make sure that they can build relationship with our team. And again, we can kind of talk through what this looks like and what that means for them as well. So there's a little bit of instruction there on where the voluntary self-ID form is. But again, if any students have any questions or anything like that, they're welcome to reach out to us to chat about it. And that's kind of all I have. It was a very quick overview, but if students do have any questions, they're welcome to reach out through iess@mohawkcollege.ca, or if any staff have any questions, you can reach out to myself, and I'm happy to chat. And I will turn it over to next on the agenda.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks.
So Carly and I were going to talk to you today about collaborations that we have across the college. We've got some exciting things happening with the Center for Climate Change Management and a Suncor grant, and then with International and a CICAN grant for global experiences. But in the interest of time, because Leah and Jessica are going to talk to you about some really great things that actually are going to feed off of what Priscilla and Heather were talking about, we're going to defer that. So if anybody wants to reach out to us to learn more about what kinds of projects that we have on the go with other areas of the college, please reach out to myself or Carly, or we can schedule another time to come back, whatever, however works best. But I'm going to turn it over to Leah.
Great, thank you, Amy. I'm just going to introduce this. Jessica's, oh, sorry, my mic's not up. Jessica's going to be the one walking us through the presentation, but as stated earlier today, Indigenous learning outcomes are becoming an integral part of the new STRAT plan, and the ILOs will be able to support faculty to implement Indigenous ways of knowing into their new and existing curriculum. And Jessica now will speak on the process and our goals to creating college-wide Indigenous learning outcomes. There you go, Jess.
Oh, I muted myself. Rookie mistake. Sorry. So thanks everybody. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try to do this quickly. If everyone could please click on the link in the Zoom chat, this will take you to a Padlet, which I'm also going to share on my screen in 1 minute. If you haven't done a Padlet before, it's a really great tool. And the question I would like the group to answer is, and think about, take a minute to think about this, is when Mohawk College students graduate, this is Mohawk College students from any program area, Indigenous, non-Indigenous. When Mohawk College students graduate, what do you want them to know about Indigenous peoples, about our knowledge, about histories, realities, identity, anything? And if it's something that's not listed on there that you want them to know, please go ahead and post it onto the Padlet link. Can everyone see my screen okay, by the way? Can you see the Padlet? Okay, thank you. And the reason I'm asking this question is because first of all, I want to hear what everybody has to say about this, because it's really important information. And this will help us determine what kind of ILOs that we will have at the college. As I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, but maybe I'll talk about it now a little bit just to save some time, is that we are in a unique position where we can write our own Indigenous learning outcomes. We can use Confederation Colleges, which has been a leader in Indigenous learning outcomes. We could adapt theirs, tweak theirs. I'll show you some examples. I'll show you their 7 Indigenous learning outcomes in a few minutes, so you have an idea of what they look like. So because we're in that position, we want to hear as many voices on this as possible. So we have a couple of responses coming in now, which is great. The impact that colonization had and continues to have on Indigenous peoples, absolutely culturally sensitive and respectful care. Great, those are great points. I see some other folks are slowly typing in their answers. And if you have more than one idea, feel free to post multiple things. Feel free to post 10 ideas if you want. There's no limit to this. Whatever kind of comes to you, or that you really genuinely think, yes, like this is what students need to know about FNMI peoples. Okay. The history of the Mohawk College name. That's a good one. Yeah, absolutely. Indigenous identity, what it means that we are all treaty people, that nursing students always consider cultural competence and safety when delivering their care. History of the name, they feel comfortable and informed when speaking with Indigenous peoples. Ready. Culturally sensitive and respectful care. That's a really great one. And I know that's something that's, you know, discussed in quite length at in Priscilla and Heather's course. How to have difficult conversations and how to respond to statements of racism or systemic racism. Indigenous healing practices and ways of being. Okay. This is not ancient history, it is recent history as well. Yes, absolutely. Using appropriate terminology. How Western medicine can be integrated with Indigenous medicine. All right, yep. So we've got quite a bit of a focus on health, which of course is understandable. We've got that right audience here with us for sure. A few more people taking as well. Okay, this is great. So thank you so much for these contributions, and they can keep coming in, which is great. You can keep spending some time, and if this Padlet will be open for the rest of the presentation. So if something occurs to you and you want to come back in, you can post your response again. I'm not gonna close it. You can still have access to it. The more content we have here, the better. So feel free to keep posting. This is really, really great. I'm just going to put my PowerPoint back on the screen and start moving on, just in the interest of time. All right, so can everyone see the PowerPoint now? Yes, great. All right, so we're going to start off by chatting about, well, why are we introducing Indigenous learning outcomes, which, as a side note, is an acronym that will be changing. ILOs are used elsewhere at the college. So we're looking for a new acronym, but for the purpose of this presentation, and while we find something new, we'll be calling them ILOs. So there's lots of different reasons how these are supported at the college and in Ontario as well. So the first is to the strategic plan. You know, this was mentioned earlier that in the strategic plan, you know, it states that there is a commitment to including Indigenous knowledge inside and outside of the classroom experience, as well as including the integration of ILOs into all programs of studies. So this is in the new 2022 to 2025 strategic plan. We have the Indigenous Education Protocol as well. So this was launched back in 2014 by the College and Institutes of Canada. And this consists of 7 principles to support reconciliation. It aligns really closely with the TRC. And in these 7 principles, it outlines the importance of Indigenous education, make it a priority, as well as implement intellectual and cultural traditions of Indigenous peoples through curriculum. So it's supported through this. Mohawk signed this, so 67 institutions across Canada signed it. Mohawk is a signatory, so they have committed themselves to this as well. And the TRC, of course, you know, there is an entire section dedicated towards reconciliation for education. So this, you know, is mentioned a few times as well. We need to educate teachers on how to go about doing this, which is part of my job. And we also need to share best practices on how to teach curriculum, especially as it relates to Indigenous history and residential schools. And as well, good pedagogical practice. You know, Indigenous pedagogies align really well with experiential learning. You know, the first principle of Indigenous learning is a preference for experiential learning. The preference to see and do for Indigenous learners is very, very clear. And this is something that is really, really important. And because we're able to also include experiential learning through this, it just makes it that much more significant. We can also better reach Indigenous learners as well. So earlier I mentioned quickly, you know, that Confederation College has been a leader in Indigenous learning outcomes. So on the screen are the 7 that Confederation created. You know, they have incorporated these Indigenous learning outcomes, which act as program learning outcomes. They've incorporated these into their programs of studies for
yes.
Okay, so again, these are Confederation's ILOs. There are 7 of them, and I have spent a lot of time talking to different colleges in Ontario the last few months, and several other colleges have been gifted these ILOs from Confederation. Confederation has given them their permission to use them at their college. Some colleges have adapted them, some have kept them, and some have written their own. So we're also in that same position. And just to kind of emphasize really quickly that there are two differences between course learning outcomes and vocational learning outcomes. And vocational learning outcomes capture the learning that's done at the program level versus course learning, which many of you know, this is something that occurs at the course level. Course learning outcomes are central to a curriculum, but vocational learning outcomes indicate what students will achieve by the end of the program. So there are two examples that are on the screen there that are from our Indigenous Holistic Practices course. So the VLOs there, examine and evaluate various aspects of our changing society. So that's a vocational learning outcome. By completing that course, students will meet that VLO once. And what we have in mind is possibly treating our ILOs like VLOs. So if we have an ILO in every program at the college, then students may have to meet that several points throughout their program of studies by the time they complete their program. And how we go about possibly integrating this into our curriculum. And these are all just ideas that we have so far. We're in the very early phases of this. There are two different processes through our academic planning cycle, which many of you are familiar with. There's new program development and program review. So we could possibly look at incorporating ILOs into new program development. Anytime a brand new program is brought into creation, it has a lot of different eyes on it at the college, lots of approval for it through different areas. And then the Center for Teaching and Learning, they sit down with subject matter experts, faculty members, and they map out what the curriculum will look like. So that could be an opportune time to decide, well, what ILO would then be incorporated into that new program. As well as program review, many of you have been through this before. It's a comprehensive cycle that occurs every 5 years to ensure that quality review that quality standards are being met in every single program at the college. So this is also an opportunity when the curriculum is looked at and analyzed. The Center for Teaching and Learning will take a look at the vocational learning outcomes and ensure that everything is running smoothly and that all the outcomes are being met. So this could also be another opportunity to ensure that other programs at the college, that they are also going to have ILOs in their curriculum. A couple of other examples as well is that for Confederation College, for example, they actually created a PAC, a program advisory committee, that completes program review for programs that have a high number of Indigenous students first. So they did that, and then they introduced the ILOs into those specific programs. That was their priority. And then they moved on to other program areas. But again, this took place through program review. And Sioux College actually does something quite interesting as well, is that instead of going through the route of program review or new program development, they've actually institutionalized a few general education electives, some gen eds, and those gen eds contain ILOs. So students can choose from a suite of gen eds, and then each student in each program at the college, excuse me, I'm sounding repetitive, sorry, each student from each program chooses one of those gen eds. And because the gen eds contain ILOs, students will be meeting them that way. So this is also a really interesting idea, and we're kind of open to anything right now at this point. We're in the very early stages. We know that we want to consult with a lot of different voices. We've spoken to the Indigenous Education Council about this a few weeks ago as well, and we have their support, which is great. They also gave a lot of great feedback to us, including what they want to see in the ILOs. So that information is really, really helpful. And we'd love to get some feedback from you folks. We know it's the end of the day, so anything that any kind of comments that you have would be great. We'd love to know, how do you feel about including ILOs? How can we inspire student voice with this? How do you best think we can incorporate ILOs into our programs? And do you have any other ideas for a different type of acronym that could, summarize them quite well?
We have a hand up. Megan?
Hi, Jessica. How are you? I had the pleasure of working with Jessica over the summer and incorporating some Indigenous content into a course. One of the challenges I've had online was ensuring that the students have support for some of the content that's covered. So doing it in an online environment has been more challenging than in person. Will there be different supports for in-person learning?
That's a good question. I think I feel like Yes, I think there would be. It will depend on a lot of things. It will also depend on, what's going on at the college. I know that there have been rumors about whether or not we'll be back in the classroom in January or not, how that's going to look. So I think a part of it's going to really depend on just what pans out with the pandemic and what the college does in terms of if we can get back into the classrooms or not. That's a great question, Megan.
Yeah, so there's two things that come to mind when you ask that question, Megan. First of all, there's actually a really great YouTube video that was actually created with the health sciences team, the one that was mentioned earlier with Elizabeth Gray, who is our counselor, and that kind of puts in context kind of what's going to be coming up for the course and kind of helping students navigate some of these really challenging and difficult conversations of either learning or unlearning some colonial practices in Canada. In addition, something that we've also done in our Indigenous courses, which again takes some organizing and planning, is if we knew we were going to be discussing, for example, residential school or the 60s scoop, we would reach out to Allison from counseling and see if we could have either a counselor online in the session, or if you're in person, having a counselor in the room to support the learners in case they are triggered or needing some support. So there's a couple of things that we can do to make it a safe space for Indigenous learners, but you're more than welcome to reach out for some other ideas we've used in the past.
Thanks for your comment in the chat, Lee. Having Indigenous subject matter experts work in each program so that ILOs are fully integrated. That'll be a lot of people power needed, but that's a really good idea.
It almost would model after what they do for the, and I'm going to oversimplify this, but I'm thinking of in CTL, how each, I think their CDSs have an academic area. Is that correct? Or the technology
Yes.
people? Someone outlined or appointed to each academic area might be.
Jessica, this is Wendy. I'm just wondering, you had mentioned a couple of times that this is sort of early days in ideation around the Indigenous learning outcomes, and that you're, looking for input and consultation from our teams. And, I know that we've sort of taken in a lot of information today and are thinking about the questions that you've posed, and likely there's going to be a lot of people who have thoughts later who would like to provide input, and certainly there's a number of people from our team who couldn't be here today. So what does that look like? Is there a way that we can facilitate collecting some of this information for you more broadly, or I didn't know if you had something already that you were going to roll out?
So thanks, Wendy. Not currently, no, but there is certainly something, we can come up with something to try to get that information from you folks, because that would be great. And like you said, I know it's the end of the day. And I personally know my brain's a little foggy. So yeah, we can be in touch, Wendy, and figure out how we can connect.
Yeah, that would be great. I think it would be wonderful to let everybody sit with all of the information that they've heard and reflect a little bit on the questions that we have and some of the input. The Padlet's amazing, but I feel like we could probably provide more. And so Nicole and I can help facilitate collecting this information if you would find it helpful in the work that you're doing.
Yes, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Super. So thank you very much, Jessica, for the presentation. Really interesting and important work again, and really wonderful to hear from all of the teams what initiatives are taking place across the college and how the college at an enterprise level is looking to move the dial forward on this particular aspiration in the strategic plan. It is evident to me that I was extremely ambitious with our agenda today. So I do apologize to those of you who didn't have an opportunity to get all of the content in that you wanted to, but it really is it speaks to the fact that this session today was intended to be a jumping off point where we could have multiple discussions and multiple different formats about this particular aspiration, about meaningfully advancing truth and reconciliation within the School of Health and Community Services and across the college as a whole. And it provides us with some really great content that I think that we can build other forums, other sessions, other dialogues around that will help us to keep this conversation going and to ensure that we are continuing to share best practices and supports and services, and that we are continuing not to work in silos, but rather to work together on bringing this aspiration to life and to where it's meant to be. So I want to thank all of our presenters today for being here. I don't know if anybody has time. I don't know if anyone has any questions for either Priscilla and Heather or anyone from the Indigenous Initiatives Education and Student Services team, but any final questions? All right, well, seeing none, I do thank you all for taking the time to come together this afternoon. Wonderful to see you, and thank you to everyone who provided information and who took the time to prepare and present. We deeply appreciate it. We will follow up this meeting with some additional information, some future sessions where we can cover some of the content that we either didn't get to today or want to continue to explore. And we'll work with Jessica and her team to see how we can make a meaningful contribution to the work that you're doing around Indigenous learning outcomes, because certainly we'd like to contribute to that effort. So on that, have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Take good care, and thank you for being here.